Hello, very beautiful community. What we've got for ourselves today is 7 key takeaways from Putin's appearance at Vlad. I'm not going to give you a health update now, but we're going to make the best of the health circumstances that some of us are in now. So I'm sending lots of love to you, whatever you are going through in your life, and I'm grateful to have found this a typically stable moment in which I can spend some time with you. Now, before we get to the 7 takeaways, what do we need to say? We need to say that Putin has been in power for a very long time. And unchecked power, with a little bit of mystical thinking thrown into it too, generates a situation which Putin is in, whereby you commune with yourself. You're no longer talking to others as much as you're talking to yourself. You're floating above history, floating at high altitude above fleeting and changing borders. That's hyper real for Putin, compared with the mere meager realness of the contingent world leaders he has to interact with. But despite Putin being in the clouds in that way, he's also got a very practical problem. His coup invasion of Ukraine failed within a couple of days. And beyond that, the expectation was that an attritional war would exhaust one of the two parties and that the exhausted party would be Ukraine. That's not happening. And not happening. And not happening. And Putin needs to keep explaining this. So let's get into the 10 takeaways, beautiful community. The first is Putin's repeated statement that he won't attack NATO. Let's read it. It turns out that war with the Russians is practically on the doorstep. They repeat this nonsense, this mantra over and over again. They can't believe what they're saying. They're either incredibly incompetent if they really believe it, because it's impossible to believe this nonsense, or they're simply dishonest. What do we make of this? What we should make of this is that if Putin were to attack NATO, he would not want to attack NATO in a way that would lead NATO to react as though it has really been attacked. The point of Putin doing a low-level challenge, a low threshold challenge to Article 5, if he does that, and we've had many conversations about whether that's likely or realistic or otherwise, but if he does that, the very point of that would be that NATO shouldn't fight back, and NATO shouldn't interpret this as a proper attack on it. So the idea of a conflict of that kind for Putin is not that Russia gets into a fight with NATO, but that NATO does not fight back, and that NATO's weakness in its response further degrades the stability of its democracies at home. The second key takeaway is about Putin's remark that Trump would have prevented the war if he were in power. They've got 2 questions about it. Why is Putin saying this, and is it true? Putin is saying it because his current tactic is to simply ignore the negative turn in Trump's language toward Russia until it goes away without translating into practical reality. But is it true? I think that I'd recommend caution here. But if you were to construct a semi-plausible hypothetical, it would have to go like this. If Trump got re-elected for a second term, and as is unlikely, in that second term went for a kind of attempt at authoritarian revolution of the kind he's going for now, then Putin may have held back, understanding that there's an acceleration of Western decline, that he can take advantage of it without necessarily needing to rely on Ukraine as a lever to undermine the West and undermine Western democracies' stability at home. But I'd recommend caution here. And I think this raises an interesting question just for us all about how do you understand the meaning of an event until history has absorbed it. Because you could make the case that a second Trump term would have been better than a Biden term followed by a third Trump term of a much more authoritarian kind. There's an argument to be explored, and I won't legislate on it, about which would have been better. There is a case to be made that a consecutive Trump term would have been less of a threat to American democracy than what we've got now. But that does not mean you don't fight for the best outcome in the historical moment which you occupy. The third takeaway is about we are MAGA too here in Russia. Putin talked about Kirk and extended sympathy to the Kirk family. And he talked about the US citizen who lost his life fighting for Russia. Putin said, I believe people like this form the core of the MAGA organization that supports President Trump. Why? Because they stand for these values, just as he does. Russia is a kind of hyper-neoliberal nightmare. It is not a conservative country. It does not have a legitimate way of backing up these claims, which are merely political technology used to trick various Western actors and Western commentators into believing that Russia must be a friend of anybody who wants a conservative counter-revolution in Western politics. 4. How would ordinary Russians feel about this speech by Putin and the 3 hours of back and forth Q&A? The depoliticized blob, that's 50-60% of the population, will be very confused. Because to it, it would seem like there was a special military operation, which then became a large-scale conflict or war with NATO, which is at the same time being narrated in terms of the exchange of tiny towns and villages in eastern Ukraine. So what sense can we make of this? There must be a logic underneath this, and we can't see it. So the Russian depoliticized blob would react to this with a psychology of inferred justification. We probably see that what Putin is saying can't be the truth, but he is our leader, and we hope that he does have good reasons for what he's doing, and that what he's doing somehow makes sense in a way that we can't see. The fifth takeaway is Putin's response to Trump about how Russia is not a paper tiger. Now, much of Putin's ventilations were all about answering Trump and persuading Trump that Russia is not a paper tiger and that Russia is doing better than it looks on the front line. Putin said, if we're comfortable being at war with all of NATO, but we're a paper tiger, then what is NATO? It's very important that when Putin talks about strength and weakness, what he is thinking about is the combination of political and military strength. If you are strong militarily, or hypothetically strong militarily because you are strong economically, that doesn't mean much if you are in political disarray domestically and can't project effective power on the international stage. And it's in that political sense that Putin thinks the West is really weak. So when he talks about relative strength and weakness, he is always thinking about the combination of the military and the political context. The sixth takeaway is an address to Western citizens. Let's quote it. Western citizens collectively have a very simple request. I'm paraphrasing it, in fact. Address our needs and don't focus on chasing chimeras instead. Don't make up false foreign threats when you fail to meet the needs of citizens at home. Putin went on to say the US is currently a good example of a country that's changing this course, right? And it's beginning to respond to the needs of its citizens. And as we know, good examples are contagious, Putin said. So this is not just a bit of manipulation, this is genuinely observation about ideological affinity with Trump. Final remark is a little bit cheeky on my part, but it's healthy for us. Putin talked a lot about a new world order, and what he said was baloney. It was thoughtful baloney, it was systematic baloney, but it was baloney. The world, he said, is much less determinate now, and therefore more depends on the quality of the decisions each actor makes. Change today is less predictable and more rapid. The monopoly of the West that emerged after the collapse of the Soviet Union is coming to an end, because just like in any sport, you can't always be on top. In the West, there is alienation between citizens and rulers, and the rulers are trying to evade facing this problem by manipulating masses which they can't control via the deployment of sort of spurious foreign policy threats. This is bollocks, but it's more thoughtful and more systematic bollocks than what Western leaders come up with. This is a more systematic set of comments. I've just touched the surface of what Putin said, than the sort of thing that Starmer or Macron might come up with. And it's also more systematic than what Zelensky might come up with. And so we are talking to ourselves less well about the state of the international order than a delusional, wildly out of touch, semi-mystical tyrant. That's a problem, right? That shows the extent of our strategic incapacity. And make no mistake, Putin is bewilderingly incompetent. The only problem is that because of the challenges our democracies face, we run a very good chance of being just that little bit more incompetent even than Putin. Lots of love, and thank you so much for getting me through this short chat together. Bye bye.